Great. Thanks so much for doing that.
Sure, Doc.
That really works, and you can feel the rhythms kind of speed up, the pace quicken, the water deepen, even in the short passage that you read right there.
Right.
Just because you read that, I'm struck by often in the book, in Begin Again, where our imagined version of Baldwin at whatever moment and our imagined, well, the version of yourself at some moment that you're presenting, they merge.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a sense of identification between the writer, you, and Baldwin, the subject, and the person. And even in that short span, it's just saying, I'm over here in Germany, I'm seeing this thing happen, and I wonder, if this is something like what led him to do the traveling that he did and to make the sojourns that he did. And he especially, you say that initial trip out of the United
Mm-hmm.
States that he made in 48.
Right.
And what I think about when I listen to you read is I'm constantly aware of that. And I wonder if there's something unique about spending a lot of time with Baldwin's writing, as well as his speaking voice and things like that. In researching James Baldwin, the person and the writer, is there some particular kind of identification that you either summon and want, or either comes at you in ways you don't want?
I think it's a combination of both, right? As you know, Baldwin is an exacting companion. And, he threatens to overwhelm, to run you over like a beer can in the middle of the street at all times, whether it's the extraordinary nature of his language, how his sentences move on the page, or whether it's the expansiveness of his intellect. It's a daunting task to walk into the room with him.
Okay.
And so there's this kind of imposition, right? And you have to work hard, at least I do, to not have him kind of go imperial, and then you try to imitate his sentences on the page, because he's that demanding.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this other aspect of the demand that then translates into the other part of your very, very accurate and perceptive observation, and that is Baldwin insists that to write about anything requires a kind of self-examination, that you put yourself right in the crosshairs, that he takes the Socratic dictum, the unexamined life is not worth living, seriously, because he believes, as you know, the messiness of the world is actually a reflection of the messiness of our interior lives. And so there is this sense in which what gets read as a kind of attraction to him is this autobiographical gesture, this serious introspection that then comes forward. And because he's doing it, and in some ways demanding it of you, when you do it, it looks as if you're trying to approximate him in some ways, like that you're reaching for him. So I think there's that. And then of course there are the moments of convergence, right? When the kind of pain he experienced and the kind of pain I experienced, and how that became the bridge, right? The connection, that suffering becomes the connection that allows me to write about him or write with him at moments, write about him in other moments, and to write about me in other moments, to write about the country in other moments, So I had to figure out at the level of form how to move between all of those different registers,
Yeah, I see that. So maybe keeping along with that idea a little bit, I was thinking about this in chapter 5 of Begin Again. You come up with this notion of the elsewheres,
Mm.
with travel in mind and with mobility in mind. And I was thinking about uh, Baldwin's notion of havens. And maybe I could read this.
Sure.
In the introduction to Baldwin's 1961 collection of essays, Nobody Knows My Name, Baldwin says that in Europe, as he put it, the question of who I was had at last become a personal question, and the answer was to be found in me. Baldwin describes this as a fearful turn and also seemingly a delusional one. He says that the inward turn was, quote, one of the reasons that I dawdled in the European haven for so long. And then he says that if I was still in need of havens, my journey had been for nothing. Havens are high priced. And so there's a couple kind of counterintuitive twists in all that, you know. We think of him or exiles in general, expatriates, as having kind of launched themselves out of trouble into a free space, and then they can do things that they need to do that they couldn't do, you know, in the previous place. And obviously that has all kinds of advantages and freedoms that a writer like Baldwin or anybody else puts to use. And that's clearly there in everything that he did. But there's an accompanying sense of entrapment there. And this notion of havens are high priced that seems to have something to do with the questions of who and what one is becoming wholly personal. Which in a way, as far as like a liberal freedom goes, that's kind of like what freedom is. You know, when you get autonomous enough to answer and ask these questions for oneself. But for Baldwin, that seemed, you know, like biographically as well as artistically, that seemed like at once a quest he was on, but then at a certain point, a cul-de-sac he found himself in. And I'm wondering if your imagination and your experience of elsewheres as you script them out and begin again, you know, bear that duality in mind. Basically, I'm asking you, why are elsewheres less high priced than Baldwin thought havens were? Or how can they be structured such that what he thought was so high priced is somehow mitigated or paid back, or, you know, whatever your metaphor of transaction you want. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, there's a sense in which we know that he leaves in 48, makes his way to Paris, because he says if he stays here any longer, either he's going to get killed or he's going to kill somebody, right?
Right.
And we know when he makes the first trip back to the States, as he's trying to hawk the manuscripts and convince folk to produce, you know, play and all this other stuff. He knows he needed to come back. He needed to hear the language. He needed to see the people he loved. And then when he returned to France, right, Paris, he realized, right, I mean, he's very explicit in that moment about how he was misfitted there as well.
Yes.
Right, that he was misfitted there as well, that he didn't trade the American myth and illusion for the French one.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So there's a sense in which that there's always the detritus in the place that says that it's, you know, in the place imagined as a haven. There's always its dank corners, right, as it were, and then it reveals itself, and then of course in its revelation, you are confronted. Well, what kind of human being are you in relation to that? Right. Elsewhere, for me, functions less like a haven than, and maybe it's purely semantic, but maybe the semantics matter here. It's a respite, a space of care, right? So even when he winds up in Istanbul, and you know this as well as anyone, he's going back and forth to Istanbul a lot.
Yeah.
But after King's assassination,
Right.
there's a community of folk there because he's not as famous yet, right? So the fame that presses in on him in the States, the fame that is pressing in on him in France isn't pressing in on him as much in this moment. He has a community of folk who allow him, as I write in the book, to laugh full belly laughs,
Yeah.
to rage, to be vulnerable, to figure out how to pick up the pieces, right? To grapple with, as he described No Name in the Street at the time, to grapple with the mighty motherfucker, right? And so the elsewhere, as I translate it, because even in Nobody Knows My Name, he uses the word exile, but he stands in this uneasy relationship. He never really embraced the idea that he was an exile, right? David Leming says he thought of himself as a transatlantic commuter in this sense, right? So I think part of what I'm trying to reach for in this moment is something that I'm trying to gift to activists in this moment, right? Because the chapter almost wasn't written, because initially I was supposed to go to Istanbul. I was going to retrace his steps. Carol Weinstein and I were going to go together,
Yeah.
and we're going to walk around Istanbul. But as a critic of Trump and Erdogan's Turkey, people were like, "Nah, don't do that, bro. Just stay in the States." And so my editor wanted me to write interview activists and see and I was like, we're always extracting things from activists. I want to write something to gift to them.
Yeah.
And so the gift was find your elsewhere. A place where you can laugh full belly laughs, a place where you can get the distance from the powers that be, a place where you can replenish so that you can re-enter the fight.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And this presents a couple problems because, well, first of all, these in terms of Baldwin's life and the way we can understand his biography, the structure of it and so forth, those different trips are not interchangeable.
Right.
He's making them for different reasons. And
exactly.
And the moment when he leaves California in '69, as you say, after King was assassinated, but he stuck around for another year and a half after that. But when he finally did, when it came clear that he could not make that Malcolm X film, right, and he had to bounce, it's one of the most fascinating years of Baldwin's life that for me,
because he's moving.
Yeah, but see, it's not only that he went to Istanbul and as you say in the book, found a location there where he could operate, where he wasn't a celebrity, where he didn't have those demands on his time and his body. But he also, he brought the house with him.
Oh, for sure.
He picked up Alain, which is his lover at the time, in Paris, and Buford Delaney, who of course is his oldest artistic mentor and almost a kind of spiritual artistic father figure. And he took his present day lover and his oldest artistic mentor with him to Istanbul, and they set up an apartment together, the three of them. And so Baldwin's, we think that in a way, and he often tells it in ways that would lead us to believe that he needed to be alone to work, to write, which of course is true. But it's also true that he needed to set up shop, to set up house, to set up life in these places in ways that, for whatever reason, he couldn't do at home. You know what I mean? And a lot of that is, I think part of the reason that he couldn't fully tell the story about, for example, that those months in Istanbul when he left California, is simply that he wasn't going to tell the truth about the real, intimate, private, and erotic nature of his life and his needs. And so